My name is Shirley Planton, and I'm consultant for U-Turn Youth Consulting. U-Turn is an education and training firm that unmasks backstories that serve as contributing factors to youth and gun violence in our community. Our clientele is made up of school districts, police department, healthcare, mental health, social service, you name it, we're training. And our mission is very clear. We want to be able to advocate on behalf of our young Black and brown kids in urban communities. We want to be able to educate folks who work with them so that they understand their lived experience and ensure that they take those lived experiences into consideration when serving them. But most importantly, the most important part I think we do of our work is to ensure that after educating, after elevating, that after educating and advocating, that we're able to elevate the quality of service that we provide to young people, the level of service that we provide, but more importantly, ensuring that we're providing services that are racially equitable, that are culturally equitable, that are sensitive to these natures. But overall, looking at what's happening right now, there is definitely a need for reform. And the reform cannot just be against police. The reform can't just be against the educational system. We've got to look at how Black and brown men are being treated in this community. And that is the reason why we decided to have this conversation, looking at what has come about from the the death of George Floyd. We thought that it was imperative. What's our role as U-Turn, right? And what is it as U-Turn that we wanted to be able to contribute to the conversation? And we looked at what we do best and decided that what we do best is really speak or give voice to our young people, right, in urban communities. But that voice cannot be given unless we understand the role, the lived experiences of many of the people that came before them. So this conversation today, specifically around Father's Day, we want to talk about the lived experiences of many of the fathers that are on here, what it means to be a Black man, the fears that you have, the visions that you have for yourself, and how those visions and fears transcend upon their sons. So you'll realize that we have a couple of families on here. Some of them are with their sons, and of course, Mr. Lionel Lightbourne will help me moderate this conversation because we want this to be a balanced conversation, right? Not just coming from a female perspective, a woman's perspective, because I can, as the mother of a son, I'm in my mind, I'm trying to understand, when does my son lose his innocence and is seen as a Black man, right? And there are conversations, as much as I advocate for young Black men in our community, I can tell you that I can never fully comprehend what these fathers go through, their fears and their vision, and what they're going through right now in America. So I want to officially introduce three of the men that I have an opportunity to deal with on a regular. I call and they never say no. I want to start with Mr. Lionel Lightbourne, and I want to say welcome to the town hall and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. And then we go over, I said it earlier, they cousins, they just don't know it yet. We got to try to figure out, how they connected. The other Lightbournes, I want to introduce Junior Lightbourne and his son, Karif Lightbourne, to the conversation.
Welcome. It's a pleasure for us to be here.
Thank you. And then you guys know Ishmael is no guest to this show. So I want to welcome Ishmael and Jeremiah Joseph to the show.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Just a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Hey, look at Jeremiah. That's what I'm talking about. We definitely as possible. So let's dive right into it. Lionel, looking at everything that's happening right now in this country, where are we? How are you processing this? And how do we communicate this to, how are you communicating? Because I know you have older sons. And that's a totally different conversation, right? Versus Karif, who is about to be a senior, and Jeremiah, who's going into middle school. So your perspective and the conversations that you're having with your 20-plus-year-old son is it's different. So I'd like to hear about that. But how are you processing this?
Well, I have a little bit more experience in the area because I've seen this from Rodney King. I was a father since Rodney King incident. So when you're talking about since the Rodney, that almost makes me a professional at this situation right now. That's what's going on. So I was also, let me give you a little background. You said that you specialize in backstories. I was a teenage father, in which I became an adult single father. And then I became a married father, which made me a stepfather.
still going through the motions and still having to raise a young Black boy while going through those emotions. So it's a very difficult thing, I'll be honest.
That's good, because we're going to talk about that conversation that you just had, that you just talked about having with your dad, because I think the conversation, as many people like to call it, isn't the same across the board, right? And I think you have to take into account culture. You got to take into account age. You got a lot to take into account. At what point did you have the conversation? You see what I'm saying? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I want to go to Karif, and I'm going to ask Karif the same thing, because I know Karif marched with many of the U-Turn team in some of the protests. And I wanted to ask, how are you processing, Karif, what's happening, right? Like, what do you feel about what you're watching and living right now?
In my opinion, I feel that this is unbelievable, and that in the past that my ancestors, the people I see all the time, and just think about in the past how hard they had to fight for our rights, for our freedom, just to be ourselves, and seeing how now what's going on now, that we still have to continue fighting, still trying to survive, and that how we are being judged and discriminated because our skin color just is 2020, and I just hope in the future and as time goes on that we get to continue and change how everything is.
Good stuff. And Jeremiah, I know you're a little bit younger, so how are you processing?
Well, to be honest, I'm a little kind of disappointed, but not surprised, because this has been going on for ages and ages. So I'm not surprised, but then again, I feel like in a way that it's like a different form, because we're in a newer year. Back then, it was different terms and ways that other people try to treat us like we're not the same as them. So
that's a good point. So I do a training, right? And in part of that training, I like to have people understand that in the 1700s, we were in chains, right? Black men were brought here in chains. And then we moved over to the whole slavery, and then we had the whole Jim Crow. And then at the end of the slide, right, there's a picture between two guns. And he's talking about a gun being held to his head by law enforcement, and then a gun being held to his hand by Black on Black crime. So we are living in a culture where, exactly what Jeremiah said, it's just transcended. The fight is still the same. We're just fighting them differently and in different avenues. So I'm going to start with Junior this time and kind of ask, what are some of your lived experience, right, when it comes to racial inequality? And the reason I wanted to start with you is because you come from the Bahamas and Grand Turk, so that means you're not Black enough. You know what I'm saying? You're living in that, I have a friend of mine that says we live in the hyphenated space, right? I know when it comes to me, I'm not Haitian enough and I'm not Black enough. So as a man, and I know how that feels as a woman, what are some of the lived experience that you have had just being a Black man? Because Junior is at least 6'2", very statuesque. What's been your lived experience?
It's kind of, you're right in what you're saying, because I had this conversation with a coworker of mine not too long ago, and I expressed to him that growing up in the islands, especially in a British territory, you know, the island is probably, I would say, 98 to 99% Black. So most of the figures, except for the governor, is people of power, are all the 60s and the 70s. The type of racial discrimination, even into the 80s and 90s, was not as prominent as it is in America during the same time. So my racial experience was quite different when I came here to Miami in 1985. But it wasn't long before I began to ingratiate myself with certain, I would say, cultural differences and certain languages that were used. For instance, in the islands, we don't use the N-word. If you know what I'm saying, that is, at least in my day, was never used. So when I came to Miami and I went to Miami Edison, I heard that, and it was like shocking to me, because that's not a word that I was even heard of back in those days. And one night I was just out. I was here probably 3 years at the time, and I was out going to visit a friend's house on 36th Street and 26th Avenue. And this is back in 19, I would say 1980, 88, 87, 88. And I made an illegal U-turn, which I knew I was wrong. So I made an illegal U-turn, and out of nowhere, a police pulled me over. And, you know, big guy, and he came up to me, you know, same old license and registration, please. And so after a few little back and forth, I knew I was wrong. So I said, officer, I know I was wrong, da da da. So he came back to the car and he said these exact words to me. He said, nigga, you're the first nigga I ever saw that don't have a criminal record and don't have nothing on your license. I mean, this is exactly, and again, it shocked me because that was the first time anyone has ever used that term towards me. And he said it just like that. And he said, nigga, if I ever catch you back over here, you're gonna see what's gonna happen to you. And I froze. And he gave me back my license and insurance, my mom's insurance card. And I stood on the side street for at least 10 minutes, just shaking, because that has never happened to me. So that was my first, I would say, experience, integration into, you know, racial discrimination, if you want to say, for lack of a better word. And from them, but the thing about that incident was, because I didn't have a history, or I didn't have a root of this being done to me or my families and so forth, it didn't change my experience, or I should say my relationship towards law enforcement, because I didn't have that history rooted inside of me. So from that point on, I just looked at that, okay, that was a bad cop on that particular night. I knew I was wrong. And, you know, years later, of course, I had other instances, but that one could have changed my whole life from that point on. But I chose for it not to. And I just looked at him as, okay, he's just, you know, a bad guy. And that night he just probably, again, back in those days, at least from to where it is now, there wasn't that many, you know, shooting by cops, or at least I would say, because again, I was only here 3 years at the time. So that was my first experience, and to this day, I'll never forget it. But it didn't change my direction towards my mentality towards law enforcement, because my grandfather retired as a police officer. I have, you know, police officers in my family. So that was my first altercation, I should say, or interaction, I should say. But I didn't allow it to change my outlook or my viewpoint on, you know, being in a situation where there was racial discrimination.
Thank you. So Lionel, your perception and your lived experiences are going to be a bit different. How do you think, and I'm gonna ask you the same thing, you know, you can give me an example of a lived experience that you've had being a Black man in America, specifically in Miami-Dade, often in Liberty City. What does that mean? And how do you think those lived experiences, you know, contribute to who, as a backstory, like we like to say, U-turn, contribute to who you are today? Because I think Junior made a valid point. At the end of the day, we dictate how we allow things to affect us, right? And so I would love to hear, what are some of your lived experience, and how do you think they have contributed to who you are?
I'm trying to figure out which one to pull from.
Pick whichever one you want, bruh.
I can think of one when I was working in Medley. Medley, Florida. I'm gonna call them out because that's where it was. Medley, Florida. Really, really small police department, predominantly white. Had a racist reputation, and I was working in there at their school bus terminal. And what happened was, long story short, I knew my rights. I mean, by nature, I'm an activist before I became an activist. So I'm big on winning arguments. And since I'm big on winning arguments, I believe it like this. When I grew up with my cousin, them, my parents used to always say, you can't fight your family in the house, right? And then be scared of the people in the street, right? So badge or no badge, authority or no authority, I see you as a man. And I was raised to respect you as a man, and more importantly, as a human being. So the respect will become automatic. I am not going to treat a police officer more special than I treat anybody else. That's just me. So because of that, I guess the police officer got indignant. But what he didn't realize, the edge I had on him, was he tried to pull me over on private property. I didn't notice at the time, but I'm pretty sure I had some ground. So basically, I told him he tried to like act like he pulled me over in the parking lot of my job, which means he has no right to be there. So I pretty much snapped on him. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I snapped on him, but I had backing too.
That's why you snapped.
So I snapped on him because I had backing. And what happened was, because I was able to articulate myself, let them know, okay, number one, you're on private property. Number two, you don't have no record of a traffic stop, so you have nothing to back you. And because he got nervous, he pushed the orange button on the CB, which is a panic button, which brought all of his police force up into the bus terminal. So once all that transpired, we had all the bus drivers and attendants on one side, the police department on one side, and they wanted to take me outside and said they want to talk to me. I told them, no, I'm not going outside because you guys are not going to do me like you did Rodney King. Of course, that incited more drama. Nevertheless, they had to wait. They had to call their supervisor. We had to call my supervisor. They had to come together to de-escalate the situation, because it was like a nice standoff. But again, it's about knowing your rights, knowing your situation, knowing how to articulate yourself. And guess what? You got to remember, these guys are public servants, so they work for you. Now, how to articulate that? Again, you don't have to. You can stand your ground and not be disrespectful. But most importantly, to know what you're talking about, because half of the time you can know the law more than they do. Half of the time, some of these police officers are grandfathered in. That means they got the job because their father was a police and their grandfather was a police. So they didn't have to learn too much of anything. And I depend on them not knowing anything. And because of that, when the police, once the supervisors got there, their supervisor told me, listen, don't worry about it. Just let him give you the ticket, and I promise he wouldn't show up. And true to form, he did not show up to court. They threw it out, and that was that. But that's just one of many situations that I had to be a part of. But what that experience did, it empowered me. So you should never have an encounter with the police department, or anybody for that matter. You should never have an encounter and not leave there empowered. Always remember, you don't remember nothing else. Every encounter that you survive, you should learn from. And after you learn from it, be empowered by it. That way you can help somebody else. And so later on, I'm the man you see today, just a social activist, advocate. And I know my right. And I have a lot of police friends. I have some people in behind me, like some chiefs. As a matter of fact, later on, after that incident, I started working with the City of Miami Police Department in their nonviolence project, which is really funny, but it's amazing how God just do things.
That's a very valid point that you made about ensuring that you can leave a situation empowered, because I think oftentimes we get so sulky into the situation, we upset, we frustrated, Ishmael likes to say, the opportunity that was in front of us, we don't get to see sometimes. And granted, while you're in it, you're not feeling that. Let's keep it 100 now, right? You got something in your face talking crazy, talking greasy, going sideways on you. You're not thinking about being empowered at the moment. You got a couple of options at that moment. But I think, again, as we begin to shift to how do we change those narratives, those are some of the conversations that we want to start to have. Yes, we may have these, but what's some of our takeaway? Better yet, if we just understand what's happening in the moment right now, the idea is to not have those moments, right? As much as, or not have them at all, because we've been fighting for this equality, equity, racial equity for way too long for us to continue to repeat these conversations. And now when you've got a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old sitting there, and like Junior said, here we are again, 51 years, and we're still doing the same thing. So I want to ask Ishmael the exact same thing, and then I'm going to ask Jeremiah, because a lot of times we tend to think that, we only have these lived experiences when it comes to color and race issues when you grow. Nah, I can tell you that there's some that happen early on while you're in school, right? Somebody may call you out your name. Somebody may call you something else. So I'd really like while Ishmael is going to answer the question, I'd really like for Jeremiah and Karif to think about, because that'll be their next question, what is a lived experience that they've experienced in school, right, about being a young Black man? Because it's real out here. And I can tell you, just working with young people, what I've heard as it relates to to young Black and brown boys and girls. And you're like, whoa, that means we're doing this a lot younger. The innocence is gone because our kids are being exposed to the racism, the colorism, the discrimination so much earlier on than many of us probably did. So, Ish, what's one of your lived experience that you think framed you?
Well, I mean, it goes back to what I said in the first part of us speaking. Was one thing my father always taught me, and my father's actually watching this, Fareed Joseph out of New York. Shout out to Daddy. But he said,
Just alike.
son, whatever you do, you know I had to give the shout out, right? We Haitian, we always be so. So no, seriously, in all seriousness, he said, son, I don't care, whatever you got to do, come home. It was 2015. My friend and I were just leaving the college campus, up in the wonderful city of North Miami Beach, right? Boy, light boy, and hey, it is what it is, right? So no pun intended with the city. I'm just saying what my experience. That's what happened. So we were driving. It was my friend who was he was a driver. I was a passenger. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Sirens go on. We're driving down 167th Street, and we get pulled over to the side of the road. Cop pulls us over. Automatically, I don't know. I mean, this fight or flight feeling starts to kick in. Everything that my father taught me, even when I was his age, son, whatever you got to do, make it home. Hands on 10 and 2. Pull out your ID, put it on the dashboard, put all the windows down. Yes, sir, no, sir. Avoid as much eye contact as you possibly can so that you don't intimidate the police officer. So these are the things that my father taught me that I never thought that I would ever have to use. This was in the reserve tank, right? So my subconscious mind. So all these things are clicking in my head, and I'm literally speaking this out of my mouth while the police officer's walking up, telling my friend who's the driver, my best friend at the time, hey man, hands on 10 and 2, pull out your driver's license, put everything here, so the officer comes. So anyway, long story, officer comes, and the first thing that he says that comes out of his mouth, he says, give me your license and your beep beep registration. We're gonna keep this PG-13. Very blatant, PG. Very brash. I mean, just angry, yelling this at us. So I hand him. It was on the dashboard, and my friend had it on his dashboard. We hand it to him, and he snatches it, goes back to his car. About an hour and 15 minutes later, it was an hour and 17, just to be exact, because I literally timed it on my phone. An hour and 17 minutes later, I don't know what took an hour, but I think during that time, as Junior expressed, him looking for something to kind of put on these young 2 Black boys that are just driving 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no reason whatsoever. So he comes back to the car, and as opposed to telling us the reason why he pulls us over, he throws the driver's license, throws my school ID, my best friend's driver's license, and his mama insurance card, because I was, on the parents' insurance, throws everything else. And, insurance cards weren't small back then. It was paper. So paper's flying all in the car. And he says, I don't care what you say. I'm the realest. Bop, bop, bop. Don't you ever come around in this area. I don't like to see y'all in this area. If I ever see you again, I'm gonna arrest you. He's saying all this, and he's placing his badge near the doorpost of my best friend's his driver's side. And none of this registered to me what was happening. When I say froze, after he left, he was like, get that out of here. He gets in his car, reverses back on the road, and peels off. We sat there for a good 10 to 15 minutes, just trying to process what just happened here. Like, not a single word, didn't ask us where we were coming from, what we were doing, just the raw emotion, like that feeling of being lost or being talked to like you're less than a human being was something that I felt enraged, I felt confused, I felt frustration. Leaving that scene, talking with my father, he said, hey, son, I'm sorry you had to experience it, but again, I'm glad that you're home. And that experience taught me so much about myself. It taught me the amount of resilience that we have as a people. It taught me that principle that 10% of life is what happens to you. 90% of it is how you respond to it. It taught me that I don't have to respond to everything that somebody says to me that comes to me with negative energy. I get to choose how I respond. So I've taken that into the way I'm talking with my son now, as far as dealing with, racism or remarks that people make at you, whether it be by way of police or even your friends. I'm just taking that and say, listen, I choose, I'm in power of my response. I'm in control of the way that I handle the situation. And I refuse to relinquish that control to any other man, because no one created me but God and my Father. So that's very important. And that's one of the takeaways that I took from that.
So it goes right back to Lionel's perspective that, you should never leave a situation without being able to be empowered by that situation, right? So now I'm going to ask Jeremiah, I'm sorry, then I'm going to ask Karif, can you guys think of a situation in school where someone might have said something to you that made you feel similar to how your father and these other guys are talking about? Because the reality is everyone experiences it, right? The problem is, do we realize that that's what we're experiencing? So Jeremiah, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so at the beginning of the year, because I switched schools when I came across in fourth grade. So in fourth grade, there's this boy. His name was Alexander, and when in the fourth grade, he was like treating me like I was like not special as he was, because sometimes he would probably not include me in something. Like, for example, they're talking as a group, and then he'll probably not include me, and it made me feel bad. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, that's a good one. Karif, can you think of a situation, because you play sports, you're doing a lot, you're getting ready to go to, can you think of a situation where you felt as though, the color of my skin or who I am is one of the reasons why this person didn't want to deal with me?
Well, to be very honest, throughout my years of being in school, from elementary to middle school and high school, I personally have not experienced it from any friends, from everybody I've been surrounded with. But if I had to say a time that I probably felt a little bit, was after a football practice with me and one of my closest friends freshman year. It was over the summer. Me and him was exiting out, and we saw, I believe, two white officers walking by past the front door. And one of our other teams walked past, nothing happened. But then once one left, exited school, noticed that the officers kind of stopped and they kind of looked at us for a couple of minutes. And we asked each other that, why did they just stop and looked at us all of a sudden? But our other two teams walked in front of them and they did do nothing. So that's probably one, maybe at that moment, I probably felt that we were kind of looked at differently and that we had no intention. We just coming from a football practice with our coaches, with our teammates, and getting ready to head home.
Lionel, you want to speak to that? I'm going to let you take that one.
No, he's right. I mean, that's when, and for the black men or black boys that are fortunate to have fathers, these are your advocates. And I'm going to tell you why. Because there's nothing more important than you. If we lose you, we lose our reason for living. Let me just be honest with you. So it's more dangerous, if you ask me, for anybody to mess with you than for you to be messed with. Let me go on record and saying that as a father. It's more dangerous for somebody to mess with you than for you understand? Then you understand where I'm going at with this. One thing I love about being a father, again, it's y'all are full reason. My wife and my children, my only reason. Take them out of the equation, I don't have no reason. So if you want to take everything from me, take one of them. And you put me in a totally different mindset. And I don't need intelligence to work instinctively. So if you want to activate my instinct, I can be intelligent and love anybody. That's when I'm intentional. But if you pull out the intelligence when you're messing with my wife or my children, a man's only reason for living, that can happen through any culture. I don't care what color you are, the rationale is out the window. So I think it's the fear for me is not so much what can happen for my son as it is what can happen to somebody that do something to my son. This happens both ways. And I think sometimes the narratives get misconstrued or confused or discombobulated because we just assume, you understand, that tragedy is going to only happen one way. And I'm like, no, I live. They are my reward. They are my source for living. I would rather God take me first. You got to be very clear on that. And when people, I'm going to tell you something as a man, and most men can attest to what I'm getting ready to say right now. When a man encounters another man, they already know it. Trust me when I tell, I don't care what color they are. They already know, oh no, this guy's going to die for what he believes. So maybe I need to be careful because he's not going to be an easy win. So they tend to come with a little bit more respect, whether they're intimidated or not. But again, you got to present yourself, and I'm going to always come respectful. And I'm going to always come nice until I have to come necessary. And you got to know that necessary is an option. But I choose to be nice.
So wait. So break down necessary, because I think we want to make sure everybody that's watching and, you know, maybe on IG or whatever, they understand what necessary means. Because you're talking about, you know, intelligence and instinct. Let's talk about that a little bit, because
Come on, brother, break it.
When we breaking down the conversation and the fears and the visions and everything that Black men have, Black, brown, whatever color, when you talk about a man and what his reason for living, I think that's a very good distinction to be able to make, intelligence versus instinct. And when does that kick in? So please share.
Oh, instinctive, that's just the animal in you. I mean, you got to remember, we're still some sort of animal, a very intelligent animal, nevertheless still an animal. So with that, instinct will kick in. It's like when you're in the car with your children and you come to an abrupt stop. Automatically, your instinct come in. Even if they have the seatbelt on, you reach your hand over and give them that extra protection. Exactly. So it's the same thing with a man. I'm like, listen, I'm not going to sit there and watch somebody hurt my son. That's not going to happen. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to sit there and watch you hurt somebody else's son. So chances are I may intervene. And you may wind up killing me before you kill somebody else's son. That's just me. That's just how I am. But at the end of the day, when it comes to being nice, it depends on the severity of the mistreatment. Okay, you may win a battle right now. You can mistreat me. Matter of fact, you can go ahead and beat me up. But I can guarantee you, if I don't have a one-man protest at the commission chamber, and that's your job, and you better pray to God that I'm still working, because that'll give you a little breathing time. But if I'm not working, I'm going to make it my job to find out what your name is and give you pure D Hades. And I'm a one-man, and trust me when I tell you, the commission chamber don't want all that. They don't want you coming down there every day because they open every day. And so you got to use the power. It's just some authority. It's a chain of command that you can actually get or exercise your rights through. But most people don't, because they don't believe that, okay, they think the law stops with that officer. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It starts with him, but it doesn't stop with it. And so you have to know what is in your power, what is in your time, what is in your capacity that you can go ahead and execute and be very creative at it. You understand? And people don't want that kind of heat, and you'll find out you'll get just all the justice you need. You probably never had that guy to mess with you again.
So, Ishmael, I want to talk about the conversation. At what point, at what age, right? So we're looking at everything that's happening. I got to be very honest with y'all. I have marched in a whole lot of protests, between protests and rallies in the past 3 or 4 weeks. And I can be very honest with you, and I've said this at many different settings. It's the same war. It's just different warriors and different arsenals, okay? So the warriors now are the Jeremiahs. I know that there are protests that have been put together by 13-year-olds on the beach. I know there's protests that's been put together by 17-year-old, Karif's age. There are protests that have been put together by 19 and 21-year-olds. So clearly, the warriors are a lot younger. And their arsenal, a lot of it surrounds technology. Okay, we ain't gonna get political, so we're not gonna talk about the TikTok and all this other stuff that's being utilized as their form of protest. So my question to you is, at what age do we have this conversation? Because I was reading an article most recently that said, Black boys are seen as a crime or does the same silliness, and you're still a boy. You can be 21, 22 and be Caucasian and still be a boy, but you turn 12, 13 and you're Karif's height, you're statuesque or whatnot, and that innocence in the eyes of other people are gone. So at what age do we begin to have these conversations to prepare our boys? Because I want to kind of shift the conversation in the last 20 minutes to really talk about our visions, the visions that we have, really along the lines of what Lionel was talking about. the vision, the narrative that we have for our boys, and then what are the fears that we think hinder them from, from achieving those visions. But I want to start the conversation by saying, at what age? When do I need to start having the conversation with, you guys know my son, with my 7-year-old? Do we need to start having it with Jeremiah at 10? What age do we have this conversation?
I'm going to be as upfront and honest as I possibly can. I mean, folks, I don't even know. I think as a father, you have this like Lionel was talking about, this instinct that you know your kid, you know your son, you know your children, you know where they are mentally, their mental capacity, what they can be able to handle, what they can't handle. And I think what's more important as to what the ages that we want to have this kind of discussion, I think what's more important is searching your own heart as a father to ensure that the conversation that you do have doesn't come from a place of the hatred that you haven't dealt with yourself, the frustration you haven't dealt with within yourself. Because I could have literally took that situation and buried it. And to be honest with you guys, I buried that instance that I explained to you for years. I never talked to anybody about it besides my father, my parents, and that was it. It wasn't until more recently, when this George Floyd situation happened, that I started feeling those same emotions and didn't understand why, because I didn't process it properly. And had to have the conversation with my son more recently at 10. Do I feel that I could have had that conversation with him much earlier? Yes, but I do feel that what I've done is, as a father, I ensured that the conversational piece I had with him wasn't about what I said, but it was the way that I responded to my environment. Because children will do more of what you do rather than what you say. So when we're around a police officer that's in Walmart, and Jeremiah can attest to this, or Publix, I'm always like, son, hey, he's here to protect you. Give him that. Thank him for him being here to protect you. I never wanted him to feel what I felt. And I think it was my responsibility to make sure that I gave him the reality of what he's going to face, while I'm still being able to help him to know how to be more productive with that. So as far as the age is concerned, you as a father, Black fathers that I'm talking to on this line today, you're going to have to be able to assess that based upon the mental capacity of what you feel that your children can be able to handle. Jeremiah is 10, but he has a mind of a 17-year-old, right? So the things I can talk to him about now, I wouldn't have been able to talk to him about when he was 6 or when he was 5, or in your case, Dr. Shirley, your son being 7. But you're going to have to be able to assess that. And it's important that when you feel that they're ready to have that kind of conversation, that you make sure that it doesn't come from the place or from the scope or the lens of hate, that it comes from, hey, I want you to be conscious about this, and I want you to know how to respond to it in a way that's going to be productive. And then, like my father says, in a way that's going to make sure that you get home.
So a lot of the conversation we're having right now, and I want to be very mindful, we're talking about fathers and their sons, but we have to be very honest that there's a lot of young Black men who don't have that relationship with their fathers, whether it be father passed away, father's locked up, father and mom, they got their own issues going, and the kids are, on the receiving end of the separation or the divorce. So I want to turn this over to Junior, because I don't know how many godsons Junior have, and I can tell you that he is actively involved in all of them. So what is the role of the greater community, those of us who have, or those of you, I'm sorry, who have to step in? How do we ensure that those young men who don't have that relationship with a father in the household still receive this information from a father figure? So, Junior, if you want to speak to that, because you play that role, even though many of your godsons, their dads are there, but you're actively involved in a lot of your godsons' life, your nephews, you have a huge family. So tell me the role that you play, and how do we get that message over to them as well?
It's kind of interesting you brought that up, and just to kind of jump off just being a godfather. For instance, my son, he has about 3 or 4 very close friends, and although they do have fathers in their lives, a lot of times I feel as if they connect more to me, I guess because they see the relationship that I have with my son, and they use me as a father figure for some of the things that they, and I'm just saying based on the conversations we have when I do see them, they use me as a father figure for some of the conversations they probably don't have with their own fathers. And a lot of times I sit and I counsel them, I talk to them, and give them a broader perspective of being a young, black boy, or I should say young black teenager, and he has 3 Hispanic friends. So there's a cultural difference, but yet they face some of the same things as young men. And I tell my son a lot of times that his upbringing is, I would say, somewhat kind of a melting pot, because ever since he was a young boy, 4, 5, 6 years old, he's always had friends that are Hispanic, I should say, from various regions, South America, Latin America, and a lot of times some of the things that he sees another friend in school will be going through, he will say, "Hey, Dad, I saw this, that, and the other, but this didn't happen to me." And I say some of it could be because of your environment. Some of it could be because of the friends that you associate yourself with. So these young men who I've known now for a little over 10 years, I feel great when my son comes home or some days he'll say, "Hey, Dad, XYZ or ABC says, man, I like the way your father is as a father." And it's because I try to be very open with all his friends, and give them certain perspectives on being a young man, being a teenager, thinking about their future, thinking about their life ahead of just, another year left in high school. And I try to encourage them and say, "Hey guys, man, this is what you got to look forward to. And if you guys don't, get a grasp of it now, a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, you're going to look back and say, man, I wish I had done that back then." And so the relationship, even as a godfather, I feel as if any young man that I come in contact with, that I feel I can leave an impression on, I try my best to. Whether it's a stranger, whether it's a little kid I meet somewhere else, whether it's at a park, whoever it might be, because that moment, you don't know how much of an impact you can be on that little boy's life or that little girl's life. And again, years later, I coached basketball for about 2 years. And it's amazing that 6 months of coaching basketball, I meet some of these parents, and this is 10 years ago. This is about 8, 9 years ago. I run into some of these mothers at Walmart, and they run up to me as if, "Coach, coach." And even to this day, they still say, "Man, I'll never forget what you did for my son. I'll never forget how you treated my son." I was in Disney about a year ago, and a kid I had no idea was at the same school as my son. I hear him shouting across the park, "Coach, coach." And it made me feel so good. And I had no idea who was just calling out saying "coach." You're at Disney, you barely think someone saying "coach," you think it's you. And this lady walked up to me and she said, "Coach, how you been? And look at my son now. He's playing basketball. He's gonna be a C." And it's an amazing feeling to see that we got to be very cognizant of the fact that any person in life that we come in contact with, we can make a difference. And I would rather be the difference maker for something good or leave something positive with a young man than something like, "Man, I would never want to meet that guy again. I'll never want to run into him again." So that's my mission. And some days, yeah, I'm not always going to succeed at it, but I put my best foot forward in trying to make sure that I leave that impression on, particularly young Black men, because those are the guys, in many cases, who have absentee fathers, whether it's through death or through separation, or those are the ones that I try my best to reach out to.
Thank you. So while we're on, I want to ask Karif, what's your vision for yourself, right? And what are some of the fears that you think may stop you, or you think about as a fear from getting to that vision? And the same question for Jeremiah, and then I'd love to hear the fathers and their response, because I kind of want to eventually, when we close out in about 10 minutes, I want for them to hear that you guys have fears too, right? We're human, and the same way you hope good things and you work towards your vision, but there are some real fears. And once we acknowledge those fears, I want us to be able to close with, how do we address those fears as a community, not individually, but how do we address the fears? Because we want to, as much as we talk about it, but we really want for people to take something away from this conversation tonight and be able to pay it forward to somebody else. So, Karif, what's your vision? What's something you want to accomplish, but what's also a fear that you have?
Well, to be very honest, my only fear is that of being looked at, being judged at, and being discriminated because of my color. But I know that my future is gonna be bigger than my fear, and that I just gotta keep pushing through and just stay true to myself. In the future, I just want to go to I just want to go to a great college, just continue doing well academics. As of right now, I have above a 3.0 GPA. I just want to continue achieving that goal, going to one of the probably the best college as possible, and of course, probably playing football at the next level as much as I can. If it doesn't work out, I just set a new goal. Looking to finance, learning more about it, and setting myself up for success and for the future. As when I get older, when I have my own kids, my own family, I can do the same thing for them, set them up for success, for them to accomplish anything in life and to go through any obstacles they face.
Well, that just put us all into perspective. That brother said, my faith is bigger than my fears. Y'all get it together on here. Jeremiah, thank you, Karif. Well done. Jeremiah, what is your goal and what's a fear that you have?
Okay, so one of my goals that I have for middle school is to not be like treated differently, to have the same respect and to have the same authority as everyone else, to be respected, treated, to also be able to focus and do my work so I could concentrate and later on, like maybe a few years later, graduate middle school. So one of my fears I have is that I'm probably not going to be treated differently, but then I could accomplish that by knowing that, doing my work and knowing that I'm a child of God, I'm a Black king, and that I could do anything I want to do with faith.
Where I'll find these kids that I need to, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do a Zoom just for them. They got words, yes. So let me see where I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna finish with Lionel. Let me go with Ish, since Jeremiah. What's a fear? What's a vision that you have as a father? And what's your greatest fear as it relates to that vision?
I mean, my vision, first and foremost, as a believer of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And I told him this yesterday, as a matter of fact, when he gave me my gifts for Father's Day, man. And I told him, the greatest gift that you could ever give me is to ensure that you're walking in the ways of Christ. My vision is for them to see Jesus. My vision is for them to be in glory with him. My vision is for them to continue to walk in the ways of righteousness according to God's word and not succumb to preferences, but make sure they live their life by God's principle and his word. And I think we live in a culture where everyone is succumbing to their preference. Oh, I prefer this way. I prefer that way. But don't realize that it's really based upon what God says. He's our creator, and he's given us a manual on how we ought to live our lives. So for me, as a man, as a Black man in this country and in society, my vision is to ensure that my family see God. They see Christ in glory. That they walk in the ways of his teachings according to his word. That's my ultimate vision. I don't care about anything else, is to make sure that they do so. And I think the fear that I have is that the culture puts so much pressure on them to come out of who they are or who I've taught them to be. I always tell them, you could be culturally informed, but not culturally driven. And I think that's the key for them, is to understand that you're going to feel all the pressure that comes from the world, but greater is he that is in you than he that is of this world. So that's just my vision. And my fear is the culture, but of course my vision is making sure that they walk in the ways of righteousness and that they honor God with their lives.
Thank you. Junior, what's your vision? Same question. And at the same time, what's your greatest fear when it comes to your son, who's a little bit older, getting ready to go to college? What's your greatest fear?
Um, you know, my fears can't even be bottled up into just one 12-liter bottle. And I look at him on a daily basis, and I always confide in my wife that, you know, at this moment in his life, he is at a pivotal stage that his life can go either uphill or downhill, because he's at a point where he is probably, again, like Lionel was saying earlier, he poses the most threat to our future. Why? Because they take away young teenage boys at his age or who's going into college. They're taking away something that they don't want to face down the road one day. Young, educated, motivated, self-sufficient young man. So he's at that mountaintop right now where, and when I say they, I'm not just, you know, gearing my they towards one particular a profession, but when I say they, I'm talking about as a whole society and everyone, you know, that's clumped into that. So my fear for him is that, you know, he can navigate himself through all of these obstacles that he's going to face in college. And if he's abroad, he's going to have to face a lot of things that, you know, mom and dad at some point, you know, and covered him, you know, for years from. So we do have so many fears, and I tell him, you know, he has to be vigilant in his prayer. He has to you know, always remember the stuff that we teach him on a daily basis, on a regular basis, about, you know, trying to navigate through all these obstacles of just life. And being a young Black man, life is not the same for him as a lot of others. So, and like Lionel said earlier, I've always told my son, you don't have to work twice as hard. You just have to work twice as smart. And if you keep finding ways to do things better than the other person, you don't have to work hard. You know, which is lately I've started changing his focus in trying to teach him about finance and the stock market, and learning what this and that is going to be about. Instead of spending money on this, you know, I'm trying to eventually show him, invest in these stocks, invest in those stocks, sit down every night and learn the stock market, because those other kids out there, that's a lot of them are doing. Our kids out there, we're trying to buy the video games. These other kids out there, they're investing in the video games. So these are little things that I try to teach him. And just to end, I think some people on social media probably saw the little poem that I put out probably like the week of the George Floyd, and it was called My Tears. And it was a very quick point, and it took me like 30 seconds to write this. Actually, I was in the bathroom about to shave, and this whole poem came to me. And it says, who will cry for my son when I go to sleep at night? Who will cry for my son even when he does what's right? Who will cry for my son when he goes out to eat? Who will cry for my son when he finds it hard to sleep? Who will cry for my son when he grows up to be a man? Who will cry for my son when he feels like a child again? Who will cry? I will. And so
Well, well
that
said. Well said.
that
Um,
brought tears to my eyes.
I-
So I
it
just want to
should.
leave on that. I just want to leave on that.
Very well said. And the reality, I'm gonna toss this over to Lionel to kind of close us out, because our reality is there are a lot of families crying. A lot of families are losing their boys, their girls. Let's not forget the girls. And I know I get a lot of conversations, so we're gonna do something like this for the women as well. But Lionel, I really want you to, in your body of work as we close out, I think Junior led you perfectly. Who's gonna cry for his son? He's gonna be the one. So when we lose a kid, and I often say, when a family loses a child, not only does that family lose, but the community loses, right? Because you don't know what that kid could have, what that young man could have become, what he could have contributed. But at the same way, how do we ensure that his death was not in vain? So I want to turn this over to you and tell us, as a community, we've heard fears, we've heard visions, how do we do better, and what do we take out of this conversation?
Well, in a nutshell, I think we got to be better at protecting our kids' right to be wrong. Because what it seems like they're expecting from us is perfect children. And we seem like to be the only race that are expected to have perfect children. My job, my vision is to protect their right to be wrong as children. That's why I'm here as a man. I think Martin Luther King said it best when he said, a man who haven't found something to die for is not fit to live. And so that when this happened to Trayvon Martin, I had to ask myself, I'm a very avid Bible study. I got one of the greatest preacher teachers here in Miami-Dade County. But it drew me to an answer that he could never teach me I absorbed this when Trayvon Martin was killed because I knew his mom. And my son used to play basketball with him, my stepson. So, and it dawned on me as a father, I was like, wow, what happened to Jesus' father when he was on the cross? Nobody never brought it up. Nobody never said, I never heard a sermon about it ever. And then it dawned on me, and I'm like, God, you have to give me that answer. And God said, well, no, because we would have 2 crucifixions that day. You understand? When the father's in a child's life, that man is not going to sit by and watch y'all crucify his son. No more than we should sit by and watch anybody crucify our sons. So certainly, I don't have no fears. My fears belong to God. He said I can cast all my cares on him. So take all my fears and cast it right at his feet. That's where it's going to be. Other than that, I have nothing but faith and favor on my side. And guess what? Your sons are my sons are your sons. You're more than welcome to correct them in love anytime you feel you have to. Because if we can correct them, we can protect them. And that's my only buy-in.
Wow. As we wrap up, I definitely want to say thank you to Lionel. Thank you to Junior and Karif. Thank you to Ishmael and Jeremiah. This conversation was near and dear to me. I always tell people I come from a family of all men. So I am constantly thinking about my brothers, my cousins, my husband, the son that I'm raising, my distant family members, because I so understand how one conversation, one police stop, and it's not just the police, how all of it can go wrong. I so understand how my son can go to school and get treated differently out of a fight than somebody else. And then we're dealing in a whole different ballgame, right? I understand the systems and how our communities tend to always get the shorter end of those sticks. But it always humbles me and warms my heart when I can hear men like you say the things that you said tonight, express your fears, express your visions, but more importantly, listening to your fruits say the same things and understand that their faith is greater than their fears, and that, they can do all things through Christ, which, like, I'm sitting here like, all right, then we done did some work. And it definitely says to me, what we see as a movement is really just the beginning. And these young people that have decided to lead the movement, it's because they get what we're trying to understand, and that we are all connected. We're all interconnected. And as long as I can stand for you and I can pay it forward and you can pay it forward for me, then our success depends on one another. So as I close tonight, I really want to say to everyone who may be listening, it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to pay it forward. It is incumbent upon each and every one of us. If one of us is to succeed, it depends on all of us. And the failure of one of us should concern all of us. So as I close out, I hope to have you guys back on another town hall. Jeremiah and Karif, phenomenal job. I am super proud of you guys. And to the men who are on here, thank you for being friends. Thank you for being brothers. And until next time, you guys have a great evening. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
You too.